When the flood ended, the story did not. That is something many people forget. We remember the ark. We remember the rain. We remember the waters rising over the world that had become corrupt and filled with violence. But the deeper mystery begins after the storm. Because once the ark came to rest, once the door opened, once Noah stepped out onto the silent earth, a question remained. What kind of world was left behind? What does humanity do after judgment? What does life look like after the old world is gone? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, did the flood truly change the human heart? The world after the flood is one of the Bible's quiet turning points. It is not as dramatic as the rain. It is not as visually overwhelming as the ark on the waters. But it is deeply important, because after the flood, humanity is given a new beginning. The earth is washed clean. The old world has passed away. The violent age before Noah is gone. And yet, almost immediately, the story begins to show us something sobering. A new world does not automatically create a new heart. To understand what happened after the flood, we have to imagine the silence Noah walked into. The storm had passed. The endless sound of rain was gone. The ark had rested. The door opened, and before Noah stood a world that must have felt both familiar and completely foreign. The mountains were there. The sky was there. The earth was there. But the old world was gone. The fields he once knew had been erased. The roads had vanished. The cities of the past were gone beneath memory and mud. The world had been preserved, but it had also been emptied. This was not simply survival. It was re-beginning. One family stepping into a cleansed but wounded earth. A new chapter for humanity, but one marked by the memory of judgment. The first act Noah performs is not to build a city. It is not to make a claim of power. It is not to celebrate himself as the man who survived the end of the world. He builds an altar. That detail matters, because Noah's first response to the new world is worship. The first movement after judgment is not human pride. It is recognition. The world is still God's world. Life was preserved by mercy, and the future begins, not with human achievement, but with gratitude. Then comes one of the most important moments in the flood story. God makes a covenant, a promise. The rainbow is placed in the clouds, not as decoration, not as a sentimental image, but as a sign that the flood was not meaningless, a sign that judgment is real, but so is mercy, a sign that the Creator remembers life, a sign set above the earth itself. And this matters because the world after the flood is not simply a random survival story. It is a covenant world. Humanity is not just starting over alone. It is beginning again under a promise. That promise does not mean evil has disappeared. It means history will continue under mercy. The seasons will continue. Seed time and harvest. Cold and heat. Summer and winter. Day and night. The rhythm of life is given back to the world. Creation itself is stabilized again. The chaos of the flood recedes. Order returns. And humanity is told once more to be fruitful and multiply. In some ways, the Bible presents this as a new creation moment. The old world has passed through water. A remnant has been preserved. The earth begins again. But here is the tension at the heart of the story. The world is renewed. Yet humanity is still humanity. This is where the story becomes more honest than many people expect. If this were only a children's story, it might end with the ark, the animals, and the rainbow. But the Bible does not end there. Because Scripture is not afraid to show that judgment can reset the world without fully removing the brokenness inside the human heart. Noah plants a vineyard. At first, the scene seems peaceful. The survivor of the flood becomes a cultivator of the land. The new world is beginning to bear fruit. But then comes one of the strangest and most uncomfortable moments in the story. Noah becomes drunk. He lies uncovered in his tent. And suddenly, the man who stood as a symbol of obedience and preservation is shown in weakness. This moment is important, not because it is sensational, but because it is revealing. Even after the flood, human vulnerability remains. Even in the new world, shame and dishonor are still possible. Even after judgment, the story of sin is not over. The flood changed the world, but it did not erase the human condition. Then the story narrows to Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth. These names matter because the future of the nations begins here. Humanity is now gathered in seed form in one family. The post-flood world is not a blank anonymous earth. It is a world from which future peoples, future cultures, and future conflicts will emerge. And again, the Bible refuses to pretend that the new world is simple. The tension within Noah's household reveals that even after the flood, human relationships still carry dishonor, conflict, and consequences. The old violence of the pre-flood world may be gone, but the roots of human brokenness are still alive. This is what makes the post-flood world so important. It is a world of mercy, but not perfection. A world of promise, but not innocence. A world of beginning again, but not of complete restoration. That distinction matters, because sometimes people imagine the flood as if it solved everything. As if water could wash away not only the corruption of civilization, but the deeper tendencies of the human heart. But the Bible is more realistic than that. The earth has been cleansed. The covenant has been given. The rainbow shines in the clouds. And still, the human story remains unfinished. This is why the world, after the flood, feels so much like our own. It lives in the tension between grace and weakness, between new beginnings and old patterns, between the hope of mercy and the persistence of human pride. That is also why Noah's altar matters so much. It shows the right beginning. A world after judgment should begin with worship. Because worship reorders the human heart, it reminds us that life is received, not possessed. That survival is mercy, not self-glory. That the future is not something we control by strength alone. The flood had already shown what happens when human power grows without righteousness. Now, after the flood, the story quietly asks whether humanity will live differently. Will the new world be built on gratitude, or will it slowly return to pride? That question hangs over everything that follows. The table of nations, the spread of peoples across the earth, the rise of new cultures, the development of cities again. Humanity begins to multiply. The world becomes populated. Life moves forward. But the question remains, has the heart changed? The answer, slowly, is no, not completely. And that is why the post-flood story is both hopeful and sobering. Hopeful, because God did not abandon the earth. He preserved life. He renewed creation. He gave promise, order, and time. Sobering, because human beings still carry within them the same dangers that darkened the old world. Pride, dishonor, rebellion, the desire to define greatness on our own terms. This becomes even clearer as the biblical story moves forward. The world begins again, but before long, humanity gathers once more in pride and ambition. The memory of the flood does not keep people humble forever. The lessons of judgment are not remembered forever. And eventually, another symbol rises on the earth. Not an ark, but a tower. Not a vessel of obedience, but a monument to human self-exaltation. That is where the story is heading. But before we reach Babel, we have to understand what the post-flood world teaches us. It teaches us that survival is not the same as transformation. It teaches us that a new world can still be inhabited by old hearts. It teaches us that judgment can interrupt evil, but only God can truly renew the human soul. And it teaches us something else that is deeply human. After great catastrophe, people long for a fresh start. That longing is real. The world after the flood is a fresh start. But the Bible refuses to flatter us into believing that starting over automatically makes us better. History can restart. Civilization can begin again. But unless the heart is changed, the same patterns can return in new forms. That is why the post-flood world matters so much for the entire Bible. It is not just the story of life resuming after disaster. It is the story of humanity being given another chance. Another chance to live under God's order. Another chance to remember judgment. Another chance to walk in gratitude rather than pride. Another chance to fill the earth without filling it with violence. That chance matters, but it is also fragile, because mercy can be received with humility or forgotten in self-confidence. The rainbow remains one of the most beautiful symbols in Scripture because it holds together both warning and mercy. It shines over a world that has already been judged. It reminds humanity that life continues under promise. But it also stands as a memory. The waters did come. The old world was real. Judgment was real. And mercy was real too. That combination is important. A world without memory becomes arrogant. A world without mercy becomes hopeless. The post-flood world is given both memory and mercy. And perhaps that is exactly what human beings still need. To remember what corruption does, and to remember that grace still makes life possible. So what happened after the flood? The world began again. Noah worshipped. God made a covenant. Creation was renewed. Humanity multiplied. The nations began to emerge. Life continued. But so did human weakness. The flood ended one world, but it did not end the need for righteousness. It judged corruption, but it did not erase the possibility of pride returning. That is why the world after the flood is not a simple happy ending. It is a solemn beginning. A new chapter written beneath the sign of the rainbow, but still shadowed by the truth that the human heart remains unfinished. And perhaps that is why this story still matters. Because every generation lives after some kind of flood. Every generation knows what it means to survive disaster and try to begin again. Every generation faces the same question. Will we build the new world on gratitude, humility, and obedience? Or will we forget mercy and return to pride? The Bible's answer is as honest as it is haunting. The world can begin again. But without wisdom, humility, and remembrance, the old darkness can rise again in new forms. That is the mystery of the world after the flood. Not simply that people survived, but that humanity was given another beginning and still carried the same need for grace. In the next episode, we will follow one of the strangest questions that appears after Noah. If the flood washed away the old world, why do mysterious giants seem to appear again later in the biblical story? The giants after the flood.